There's a silent group walking among us, people whose minds feel like oceans while the world swims in puddles. They think deeply, feel intensely, and question relentlessly. And yet, they often struggle. They wrestle with isolation, self-doubt, and the weight of seeing what others miss. But as Carl Jung understood, this struggle is not a flaw, it's a function. Deep thinkers aren't broken. They're tuned to a different frequency. They carry a rare power, but that power doesn't come free. It comes with a cost. And that's what this video is about. Not just why deep thinkers suffer, but why their suffering is deeply meaningful. If you've ever felt like your thoughts are too heavy for the room you're in, like your questions make others uncomfortable, or like your inner life is too complex to explain, this is for you. Because you're not alone. You're not strange. You're just awake in a world that prefers sleepwalkers. Let's begin with the paradox. Deep thinkers crave truth, but truth is rarely comfortable. Most of society is built around avoiding it. We distract ourselves with entertainment, social media, work, shallow conversations, anything to avoid facing the raw, unfiltered complexity of existence. But the deep thinker? They can't look away. They're wired to notice the cracks in the illusion. They question norms, challenge assumptions, and stare into the void that most people pretend isn't there. And here's the kicker. They often pay the price alone, because depth isolates. When you see layers others don't, when you feel things others numb, when you ask questions others dodge, you start to feel like an alien in your own species. Have you ever looked around and wondered, am I the only one seeing this?
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
Carl Jung believed that deep thinking is not just a mental activity, it's a soul process. According to Jung, our minds are not separate from the collective unconscious, the vast sea of symbols, archetypes, and inherited patterns that shape human life. Deep thinkers tap into this sea more often than they realize. That's why they're drawn to myth, symbolism, existential questions. They're not just thinking, they're translating the unconscious into language. But here's the tragic twist. The more you engage with the unconscious, the more you risk being overwhelmed by it. Jung called this the night sea journey, a psychological descent into chaos, confusion, and shadow. It's a rite of passage that few understand, let alone respect. What if your confusion isn't a weakness, but a sign that you're diving deeper than most ever dare? This is why deep thinkers often suffer from anxiety, depression, or existential dread, not because they're broken, but because they're awake. They're in touch with the world's pain, its contradictions, its illusions. They can't just go with the flow, because they see the current and where it leads. But that awareness can become a double-edged sword. Without grounding, it becomes paralysis. Without expression, it becomes despair. Without community, it becomes madness. Jung warned that when the unconscious is not integrated, it overwhelms the ego. The thinker becomes lost in their own depth, drowning in insight with no shore in sight. What use is vision if you have no language or no one to listen? And yet, inside this struggle lies the rarest kind of power. The deep thinker has the potential to see what others can't, to feel what others avoid, to name what others fear. They can become translators of truth, bridge builders between the conscious and unconscious, the seen and unseen. But this power is only unlocked through integration. Jung taught that true individuation, the process of becoming whole, requires us to face the dark, not run from it, to embrace our complexity, not simplify ourselves for comfort. And that's the invitation, to stop apologizing for your depth and start cultivating it. Depth is not a burden, it's a tool for transformation. But it must be wielded with care. Have you been hiding your depth because the world fears it, or because you haven't yet learned to trust it yourself? There's also a spiritual dimension to this. Deep thinkers often feel a pull toward the numinous, the sacred, the mysterious, the transcendent. They may not identify with organized religion, but they sense something more. A pattern behind the chaos, a whisper beneath the noise. But this too can be painful, because once you've touched the infinite, the finite feels empty. Once you've tasted the stars, the mundane becomes intolerable. This leads many thinkers into cycles of boredom, restlessness, even nihilism. But Jung reminds us, the goal is not to escape the world, but to transform within it. The true mystic doesn't flee reality, they deepen it. They bring the sacred into the ordinary. The temple isn't on a mountain, it's in your daily life, if you know how to see. Are you searching the heavens for meaning while ignoring the miracle of your breath? And now here's where it gets really wild, because in a world like ours, where attention spans are shrinking and conformity is rewarded, where deep thinkers are not just rare, they're dangerous. And dangerous to systems that depend on unthinking obedience. Dangerous to cultures that thrive on distraction. Dangerous to ideologies that fear nuance. But that's exactly why they're essential. Because when the world forgets how to think, the thinker becomes a torchbearer. Not just for themselves, but for everyone stumbling in the dark. Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." That privilege begins with depth, but it only becomes power when you step out of the cave and share the fire. What if your struggle is not a detour, but the very path others will one day follow toward truth? So if you're a deep thinker, struggling to fit in, feeling like your mind is too much, your questions too heavy, your insights too obscure, remember this: you're not too much. You're just ahead. And the very things that isolate you now may be the things that liberate others later. But only if you stay the course. Only if you learn to carry your depth with dignity. Only if you stop waiting for the world to understand you and start becoming the kind of person who understands the world. Because in the end, the deepest thinkers don't just solve problems. They reshape reality. If the first truth is that deep thinkers suffer because they see more, then the second truth is even more difficult. They also suffer because they carry more within. Carl Jung's greatest insight wasn't just that the unconscious exists, it's that it demands to be integrated. And for deep thinkers, the unconscious isn't a distant concept. It's a constant companion. The deeper your thoughts go, the more likely you are to awaken parts of yourself that others never encounter. The shadow, the archetypes, the primal forces that live beneath your intellect. This is both a gift and a curse. A gift because it gives you access to immense depth, intuition, and insight. A curse because if you don't confront what's in the dark, it will control you from the shadows. Are you thinking your thoughts, or are they thinking you? Jung believed that every person carries a shadow, the parts of ourselves we reject, deny, or bury. But deep thinkers, because of their introspective nature, are more likely to see their shadows. And that's where the real struggle begins. You're not just battling external confusion, you're wrestling with your own contradictions. You see your flaws with painful clarity. You recognize your ego in real time. You witness your own hypocrisy, your fears, your impulses. And without the right tools, this self-awareness can become self-torture. You spiral into doubt. You overanalyze your every move. You become a prisoner of your own mind. Is your self-awareness making you wiser or just more afraid to act? But here's what Jung knew. The shadow isn't evil. It's energy. It's raw, unfiltered life force. Anger, desire, jealousy, ambition, even fear, these aren't signs of corruption. They're data. They show you where you're wounded, where you're longing, where you need integration. The problem isn't that you have darkness, it's that you pretend you don't. And this is where many deep thinkers fall into a trap. They try to live in the light only. They try to be purely rational, purely good, purely enlightened. But as Jung said, no tree, it is said, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. If you want to rise, you must also descend. You must make peace with your shadow. What part of yourself have you exiled that might actually hold your strength? This isn't just psychological. It's existential. The deep thinker must face the ultimate paradox, that the very parts of yourself you fear may be the keys to your power. Your doubt keeps you humble. Your pain makes you compassionate. Your isolation sharpens your vision. Your rage might protect your boundaries. Jung didn't believe in slaying the dragon. He believed in befriending it, integrating it, becoming whole, not pure. And through that wholeness, a new kind of strength emerges. One that isn't performative, but rooted. Not loud, but unshakable. Can you learn to hold both your light and your darkness without being crushed by either? And here's the practical reality. When you begin to integrate your shadow, your life changes. You stop apologizing for your intensity. You stop explaining away your complexity. You stop diluting your truth to make others comfortable. You become more authentic, which ironically makes you more effective. People sense your depth not as confusion, but as gravity. You stop trying to fit in because you realize you were never meant to. You were meant to lead, not by domination, but by presence. Not by certainty, but by courage. You become the rare kind of person who can stand in complexity without needing it to resolve. Are you living in your truth, or just performing a version of yourself that feels safe? But this journey isn't quick. It's not a weekend retreat or a productivity hack. It's a lifetime practice of self-honesty, self-compassion, and solitude. And solitude, real solitude, is something most people fear. But for the deep thinker, it's necessary. Not because you hate people, but because you need space to process what your mind absorbs. You need time to metabolize the infinite. But even solitude has a danger. It can become isolation. So the challenge is to oscillate, to retreat when needed, but return with what you've learned. And to descend into yourself, but not disappear. The world needs your voice, your insight, your synthesis, but it needs it whole. Are you using solitude to evolve or to hide? In the end, what Jung teaches us is this: the path of the deep thinker is not easy. It's not always happy. It's not always understood. But it is necessary, because in a world that is increasingly shallow, distracted, and fragmented, depth is revolutionary. And those who cultivate their depth, who integrate their shadow, who embrace their complexity, who learn to live with paradox, become something rare, whole humans. Not perfect, not enlightened, but real. And realness, in a world of masks, is a rare and radical power. If you've made it this far, then you already feel it, that inner tension between the weight of your thoughts and the silence of the world around you. That push-pull between wanting to vanish into solitude and the aching sense that you were meant to do something with all this awareness. And this is where the journey of the deep thinker transforms. It's no longer just about survival. It's about service. Carl Jung believed that those who descend into their own unconscious and return bear a kind of sacred responsibility. They've seen the underworld. They've walked through confusion, despair, contradiction. And if they can survive that descent, they are uniquely equipped to bring something back. Not just for themselves, but for all of us. What if your suffering wasn't just personal, but initiatory? The philosopher warrior isn't someone with all the answers. They're someone who has made peace with not having them. They're not trying to dominate the world with intellect, they're trying to serve it with insight. They don't speak to impress, they speak to awaken. And that awakening often comes at a cost. You will lose people who want the old, simpler version of you. You will be misunderstood, criticized, even mocked. But your role is not to be liked, it's to be true. And in a world spinning on the axis of distraction and dopamine, truth is revolutionary. It's uncomfortable, it's raw, and it's medicine. Are you willing to be uncomfortable if it means becoming the person you were born to be? Jung's idea of individuation wasn't just for the self, it was for the collective. A society full of unindividuated people, people who haven't faced their shadow, who live by surface roles, who fear silence, is a society that becomes hostile to depth. And that's what we're seeing now. Depth is ridiculed. Thoughtfulness is seen as overthinking. Stillness is called laziness. But these are the very qualities the future depends on. Because without reflection, there is no wisdom. Without discomfort, there is no transformation. Without internal revolution, the external world remains in chaos. What if the world doesn't need more noise, but more people who can hold silence without running from it? And let's be honest, it's tempting to retreat, and to live in the safety of thought, to create a fortress of ideas where the world can't reach you. But that's not why you were given this mind. You weren't meant to hide in your insight, you were meant to embody it, to act, to create, to risk. Because understanding without action is spiritual hoarding. It fills you up but never flows outward. You become bloated with ideas but starved for life. Jung said, "You are what you do, not what you say you'll do." So the question becomes, what are you doing with your depth? Not in theory, in practice, in the real, messy, imperfect world. This is where the archetype of the philosopher warrior becomes essential. It's not enough to think you must fight. Not with violence, but with vision. You must protect your inner world from the corrosion of shallow culture. You must defend your time, your attention, your purpose. You must fight to stay awake in a world that rewards numbness. And that fight is sacred. Because every time you choose truth over comfort, presence over distraction, depth over performance, you inspire something ancient in the people around you. You remind them of what it means to be fully human. What kind of example are you willing to become? The final transformation is this. The deep thinker must learn to love the world as it is, not just as it could be. That's the hardest part. To hold vision and compassion together, to see the brokenness and still choose to engage, to witness ignorance and still respond with grace, and to feel despair and still choose to create. Jung believed that becoming whole wasn't about escaping human flaws, it was about embracing them with consciousness. The philosopher warrior doesn't wait for a perfect world. They show up fully, vulnerably, and courageously in the one we already have. Can you live with an open heart, even when you know how much it might hurt? So here's the truth. Your depth is not an accident. It's not a curse. It's not a burden. It's a calling. And yes, it will isolate you. It will confuse you. It will demand everything from you. But if you answer it, if you integrate your shadow, embody your insight, and serve the world with courage, you will become something rare. Not just a thinker, not just a survivor, but a living bridge between the unconscious and the conscious, between darkness and light, between what is and what could be. You will become a philosopher warrior. And in a numb world, that is the rarest kind of power.